The first time it happened, she was alone in her apartment reading a book about ancient civilizations. She came across a passage written in an old language, symbols she had never studied. And without thinking, without planning, she opened her mouth and read it aloud, perfectly. The pronunciation flowed from her lips like she had spoken this language her entire life. And then she stopped, frozen, because she had no idea what she had just said or how she had known how to say it. That voice wasn't hers. Those words came from somewhere else, from someone else, from a part of her that remembered things her conscious mind had never learned. Her name was Samantha, and she had always been sensitive to things other people didn't notice. As a child, she would know things before they happened. She would sense emotions in rooms that had been empty for hours. She would dream of places she had never been, and wake up with detailed memories of lives she had never lived. Her parents had written it off as an overactive imagination. Her teachers had called her a daydreamer, but Samantha had always known it was more than that. She was picking up on something real, something beyond the normal five senses, something that connected her to a larger reality most people couldn't perceive. As she got older, the experiences intensified. She would walk into historical sites and feel overwhelmed by emotions and memories that didn't belong to her. She would touch old objects and receive flashes of the people who had owned them. She would meet strangers and instantly know details about their lives that they hadn't shared. But the speaking in languages she didn't know, that was new. That had only started happening in her late 20s, and it was becoming more frequent and more unsettling. After the incident with the ancient text, Samantha started testing herself. She would find recordings of dead languages online, languages no one spoke anymore, and she would listen. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, she would understand, not through translation, not through logic or study, but through a deep knowing that bypassed her thinking mind. She would hear ancient Sumerian, or Sanskrit, or hieroglyphic Egyptian being spoken, and somewhere inside her, something would respond with recognition. Yes, I know this. I remember this. I spoke this once. But the most disturbing experiences were when the voice came through, uninvited. She would be having a normal conversation with a friend, and suddenly different words would come out of her mouth. Words in a language she didn't recognize, spoken with an accent she didn't have, carrying meanings she didn't consciously understand. Her friends would stare at her, confused or alarmed, asking what she had just said. And Samantha would have no answer because she didn't know. It was like something else was using her voice, speaking through her, borrowing her vocal cords to express thoughts from another time and place. The breaking point came during a dinner party. Samantha was with a group of friends, laughing and talking, when someone mentioned a trip they had taken to Greece. The moment the word Athens was spoken, something shifted in Samantha's awareness. The room seemed to tilt. The sounds around her became muffled and distant, and then her mouth opened and a stream of ancient Greek poured out, fluent and passionate, words she had never learned but that her tongue formed with perfect ease. Her friends fell silent, staring at her. One of them, a classics professor, looked shocked. He told her later that what she had spoken was classical Greek, not the modern version but the dialect spoken thousands of years ago, and she hadn't just been making sounds, she had been reciting something specific. Something that sounded like poetry or philosophy, something profound and beautiful that he couldn't fully translate without research. Samantha barely remembered saying it. She had felt herself slip away, felt another presence move forward and take control of her voice. And when it was over, when she came back to herself, she was shaking and crying, terrified by the experience of being a passenger in her own body. Her friends tried to comfort her, but how could they? They didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand what was happening. That's when she decided she needed help. Not a medical doctor who would probably diagnose her with a psychiatric disorder. Not a therapist who would try to find childhood trauma to explain it. She needed someone who understood consciousness beyond the material, someone who worked with past lives and soul memory and the mysteries of human potential. She found Dr. Catherine through an online search, a regression therapist who specialized in what she called Walkins and soul fragmentation. Cases where multiple lifetimes or consciousnesses seemed to be present in one body. Dr. Catherine's office felt safe and sacred. The walls were lined with crystals and plants, and soft music played in the background. Dr. Catherine herself was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately put Samantha at ease. They talked for a long time before beginning any regression work. Samantha described all her experiences, the sensitivity she had carried since childhood, the knowing of things she shouldn't know, and especially the voice, the speaking in languages she had never learned. Dr. Catherine listened without judgment, nodding often, taking notes. When Samantha finished, Dr. Catherine explained that what she was experiencing sounded like spontaneous past life bleed through. She explained that everyone who had lived before carried memories from those previous lifetimes, but usually those memories stayed buried in the subconscious. However, some people, especially those who were spiritually sensitive or going through awakening processes, could have those memories break through into conscious awareness. And sometimes, when the veil between lifetimes was particularly thin, past life personas could temporarily overlay the current personality, speaking through them, acting through them, expressing themselves in ways that felt foreign and unsettling. Dr. Catherine said the best way to understand and integrate these experiences was to consciously access the past lives that were breaking through, to meet them deliberately instead of having them surface randomly, to understand who they were, what they wanted to communicate, and why they were making themselves known now. This would give Samantha control over the process instead of feeling like a victim of it. Samantha agreed immediately. She was desperate for answers, desperate for understanding, desperate to feel like she was driving her own life instead of being driven by forces she could unsee or control. They scheduled a regression session for the following week. Dr. Catherine gave her instructions for preparation, ways to ground herself and set intentions for the work they would do together. The week passed slowly. Samantha was both eager and anxious about what she might discover. Part of her hoped the regression would reveal a simple explanation, something that would make all of this make sense and give her tools to manage it. Another part was afraid of what she might find, afraid of opening doors that maybe should stay closed. The day of the session arrived. Samantha sat in a comfortable chair in Dr. Catherine's office, wrapped in a soft blanket, surrounded by the gentle glow of salt lamps. Dr. Catherine explained the process again, reminding Samantha that she would be safe, that she was in control, that she could return to normal awareness at any time if she needed to. Then they began. Dr. Catherine's voice was soothing as she guided Samantha into a deep state of relaxation. She used a technique designed to access past life memories while maintaining conscious awareness, so Samantha wouldn't lose herself completely the way she had during the spontaneous episodes. Dr. Catherine counted her down, asking her to imagine descending a staircase, each step taking her deeper into trance, deeper into the realm where soul memories lived. At the bottom of the stairs, Dr. Catherine suggested, Samantha would find a hallway with many doors. Each door represented a different lifetime, and behind one of those doors was the source of the voice, the past life persona who had been speaking through her. Dr. Catherine asked Samantha to allow her intuition to guide her to the right door, to trust that her higher self knew which lifetime needed to be explored. Samantha saw the hallway clearly in her mind's eye. It stretched endlessly in both directions, filled with countless doors of different shapes and sizes. But one door drew her attention immediately. It was larger than the others, made of dark wood with bronze hinges, and it was slightly open, light streaming through the crack. She moved toward it, feeling both pulled and resistant. When she reached it, she hesitated for a moment, then pushed it fully open and stepped through. The transition was instant and complete. One moment she was Samantha in Dr. Catherine's office. The next moment she was someone else entirely, in a different body, in a different time, in a different world. The shift was so total and so vivid that it took her breath away. She was standing in a large room with high ceilings and columns carved with intricate designs. The floor beneath her feet was cool marble. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. The space felt sacred, like a temple or a place of learning. She looked down at herself and saw she was wearing a long white robe, simple but elegant, tied at the waist with a woven cord. Her hands were different, darker than Samantha's, with long fingers and carefully manicured nails. Dr. Catherine's voice came from far away, asking her to describe what she was seeing, to speak about this lifetime. And when Samantha opened her mouth to answer, it wasn't her voice that came out. It was the other voice, the one that had been speaking through her uninvited. But now it had context. Now it had identity. Now it had a story to tell. The voice said her name in this lifetime was Aspasia, and she was a priestess and philosopher in ancient Greece. The year, as near as could be translated into modern understanding, was somewhere around 420 BC. She lived and worked in Athens, in a temple dedicated to Athena, goddess of wisdom. But her role extended beyond religious duties. She was a teacher, a scholar, someone who gathered students and engaged in philosophical discussions about the nature of reality, consciousness, ethics, and truth. Dr. Catherine asked Aspasia to describe a typical day in her life. The words flowed easily now, no longer filtered through Samantha's confusion but coming directly from the source. Aspasia described waking before dawn to meditate and pray, aligning herself with the divine energies she served. She described the morning rituals at the temple, the offerings and invocations that connected the material world to the spiritual realm. And then she described her real passion, the afternoons spent in dialogue with students and fellow philosophers, exploring questions that had no easy answers, pushing the boundaries of understanding, seeking wisdom not through authority but through reason and contemplation. Aspasia explained that she was unusual for her time. Women in ancient Greece were not typically allowed to participate in philosophical discourse, were not educated in the same ways as men, were expected to stay in domestic roles. But Aspasia had been different. She had been trained by her father, himself a philosopher, who had recognized her brilliant mind and refused to let it be wasted. He had educated her as he would have educated a son, teaching her logic and rhetoric and the great questions that had occupied thinkers for generations. When her father died, Aspasia could have retreated into conventional women's roles, but she didn't. She claimed the authority of a priestess, which gave her religious legitimacy, and used that platform to continue teaching. She gathered students, both male and female, who were drawn to her wisdom and her ability to guide them toward their own insights rather than simply lecturing at them. She became known throughout Athens, respected by some, controversial to others, but undeniably influential in the intellectual life of the city. Dr. Catherine asked Aspasia to move forward in that lifetime, to show what happened as she grew older. Aspasia described years of teaching, of engaging with some of the greatest minds of that era. She spoke of debates and discussions that lasted for hours, of insights that emerged when minds met in genuine curiosity and openness. She spoke of students who went on to become philosophers and leaders themselves, carrying forward the ideas and methods they had learned in her presence. But she also spoke of the dangers. Philosophy in ancient Greece was not always welcome, especially when it questioned traditional beliefs or challenged the power structures of society. Aspasia described how some of her teachings were seen as threatening, how some of the authorities viewed her as a corrupting influence, especially on young minds. She described accusations of impiety, of teaching ideas that undermined the gods and the social order. The scene shifted, and Aspasia found herself in a different setting. She was older now, her body showing the marks of age. She was standing before a council of men, stern-faced and judgmental, who were questioning her about her teachings. They asked if she believed in the gods. She answered yes, but not in the simple, childish way that many people did. She believed the gods represented principles and forces, metaphors, for understanding the complexities of existence. This answer didn't satisfy them. They wanted simple affirmation, unquestioning obedience. They accused her of corrupting the youth, of teaching them to question rather than accept, to think rather than obey. They said her influence was dangerous, that she needed to stop her philosophical activities and conform to what was expected of women in society. Aspasia defended herself eloquently, arguing that wisdom came through questioning, that blind acceptance led to stagnation and tyranny, that the gods themselves valued truth-seeking over thoughtless ritual. But her words, though compelling, didn't change the outcome. The council decided that she must cease her public teaching. She could continue her religious duties at the temple, but she could no longer gather students, no longer engage in open philosophical discourse. It was a compromise that allowed them to silence her without the controversy of executing a respected priestess. But for Aspasia, it felt like death anyway. Samantha, experiencing Aspasia's emotions, felt the crushing weight of that silencing. Aspasia had lived for the pursuit and sharing of wisdom. Teaching was not just what she did, it was who she was. Being forbidden to speak, to teach, to engage in the dialogue that gave her life meaning, was a profound violation. She complied outwardly, not wanting to give them an excuse for harsher punishment, but inwardly, she continued to burn with ideas and insights that had no outlet. Dr. Catherine asked what happened next. Aspasia described years of constrained existence, going through the motions of temple duties, while her mind and spirit slowly withered. She would look at her former students when they passed her in the street, and they would exchange glances full of unspoken longing and frustration. The vibrant intellectual community that had formed around her teaching dissolved. The questions that had been so alive in their discussions went unasked and unanswered. She grew physically ill, her body reflecting the sickness of her silenced soul. She spent her final years largely alone, tended by a few loyal friends, but isolated from the intellectual life that had sustained her. And when she died, it was with profound sadness and regret. Not regret for what she had taught or how she had lived, but regret that her voice had been silenced, that her wisdom had been locked away, that she hadn't been able to share all that she had learned and could have taught. As Aspasia's consciousness separated from that dying body, as she moved into the space between lives, she carried with her an intense determination. She vowed that she would find ways to speak again, to share wisdom again, to ensure that the voice of truth would not be silenced. She understood that she might not be able to teach openly in every lifetime, might face restrictions and obstacles, but she would find ways. She would speak through whatever channels opened to her. Her voice would be heard, one way or another, across lifetimes and centuries. Dr. Catherine guided Samantha to understand the connection between Aspasia and her current life. Samantha saw it clearly now. The spontaneous speaking in ancient Greek, the voice that came through her uninvited, it was Aspasia trying to fulfill that vow. Aspasia's soul was still so passionate about sharing wisdom, still so determined to speak, that she was breaking through into Samantha's consciousness and using Samantha's voice to express thoughts and truths that had been silenced in that ancient lifetime. But Dr. Catherine explained that this needed to be integrated, not suppressed, but also not allowed to overwhelm Samantha's own identity. Aspasia and Samantha were both aspects of the same eternal soul, separated by time and experience, but ultimately one being. The goal wasn't to get rid of Aspasia, but to consciously merge the two, to allow Samantha to access Aspasia's wisdom and passion while maintaining her own agency and control. Dr. Catherine facilitated a conversation between the two aspects. Samantha spoke to Aspasia directly, thanking her for her courage, for her dedication to wisdom, for her refusal to be silenced even across lifetimes. But Samantha also explained that the random, unconscious breaking through was frightening and disruptive. She asked Aspasia to work with her instead of through her, to share her wisdom in ways that honored both of their identities. And Aspasia responded, her voice still coming through Samantha's lips, but now with conscious permission and collaboration. She explained that she hadn't meant to frighten or overwhelm. She had just been so eager to speak again, so passionate about sharing insights, that she had pushed through without consideration for how it would affect Samantha. She agreed to communicate more consciously, to wait for invitation, to work in partnership rather than taking over. Dr. Catherine helped them create an agreement, a conscious arrangement between the two aspects of the same soul. When Samantha wanted to access Aspasia's wisdom, when she wanted to channel that philosophical understanding or speak with that ancient authority, she could invite Aspasia forward consciously, and Aspasia would come, would lend her voice and knowledge, but would respect Samantha's boundaries and withdraw when asked. It would be a collaboration, a conscious integration, rather than an unconscious invasion. Dr. Catherine brought Samantha back to present awareness slowly and gently. When she opened her eyes, she felt fundamentally changed. She understood now where the voice came from, understood who Aspasia was and why she had been speaking through her. And more than that, she felt Aspasia's presence not as something foreign and frightening, but as a part of herself, a deep part that held wisdom and experience she could access when needed. In the days and weeks after the regression, Samantha experimented with this new understanding. She would sit quietly and consciously invite Aspasia's presence, asking for insight or guidance. And Aspasia would respond, not by taking over but by offering perspectives and understanding that came from that ancient lifetime of philosophical inquiry. It was like having an inner teacher, a wise elder within herself that she could consult whenever she needed deeper wisdom. The random, uninvited speaking in ancient Greek stopped, or rather, it transformed. Now, when Samantha felt Aspasia wanting to express something, she would feel a gentle nudge rather than an overwhelming takeover. She could choose to give Aspasia voice or not, could make space for that expression at appropriate times rather than having it erupt in the middle of random conversations. Samantha also found that she had access to knowledge she didn't consciously possess. When she read philosophy, especially ancient Greek philosophy, she understood it at a deeper level than intellectual study could account for. She could see the connections and implications that scholars spent years trying to unpack. She could sense what the philosophers were really trying to say beneath the words they wrote. This was Aspasia's gift, the fruit of a lifetime spent in pursuit of wisdom, now available to Samantha in her current life. She started teaching, at first just small workshops about philosophy and consciousness, then larger classes and online courses, and when she taught, she could feel Aspasia's energy blending with her own, lending authority and depth to her words. Students responded powerfully, sensing that they were receiving more than just information, that they were connecting with something ancient and profound that spoke to their souls. Samantha also explored her other past lives, wondering if there were other voices, other personas that might want to speak through her. She discovered there were a lifetime as a Celtic priestess who had kept oral traditions alive, a lifetime as an African storyteller who had preserved tribal history through narrative, a lifetime as a medieval mystic who had documented spiritual visions despite church prohibition. All of them voices that had been silenced or restricted in their own times, all of them eager to speak again through whatever channel opened to them. She learned to work with all of them, to consciously invite their presence when their specific gifts were needed. The Celtic priestess helped her connect with nature and ritual. The African storyteller helped her communicate complex ideas through narrative. The medieval mystic helped her articulate spiritual experiences. They were all her, all aspects of the same eternal soul, each bringing gifts and perspectives from their unique incarnations. But Aspasia remained the strongest, the most insistent, the one who had broken through first and most dramatically, and Samantha understood why. Aspasia's silencing had been so traumatic, so unjust, that her soul had carried that wound forward for over 2,000 years. Being forbidden to speak and teach had been a soul-level injury that needed healing, and the healing came through remembering, through understanding, through consciously reclaiming the voice that had been taken away. Samantha thought often about Aspasia's life, about what it must have been like to be a brilliant woman in a time and place that didn't make space for female philosophers. She felt such admiration for Aspasia's courage, for her refusal to accept the limitations society tried to impose, for her dedication to wisdom and truth, even when it made her life more difficult and dangerous. And she felt honored to be the current incarnation of that same soul, to carry forward that legacy of truth-seeking and wisdom-sharing. She also understood her own current life differently, the sensitivity she had carried since childhood, the ability to know things she shouldn't know, the feeling of being connected to something larger than herself. All of it made sense now. She was picking up on her own past lives, on the accumulated wisdom and experience of many incarnations. She wasn't just Samantha, a person born in the late 20th century. She was an ancient soul with thousands of years of experience, carrying gifts and wounds and wisdom from countless lifetimes. This understanding transformed how she moved through the world. She felt more confident, more grounded, more aware of her purpose. She was here to teach, to share wisdom, to be a voice for truth in whatever form that could take in the modern world. She didn't need to be a priestess in a Greek temple or a philosopher in an ancient academy. She could fulfill the same mission through writing, teaching, speaking, creating content that helped people expand their consciousness and connect with deeper truths. And she never felt alone anymore. She carried her past life selves with her always, internal companions who had walked different paths but were ultimately all walking toward the same goal. When she needed courage, she connected with the Celtic priestess who had faced down invading armies to protect sacred sites. When she needed wisdom, she connected with Aspasia and her lifetime of philosophical inquiry. When she needed compassion, she connected with the medieval mystic who had loved so deeply despite suffering. Years passed. Samantha's work grew and evolved. She helped countless others understand their own past lives, their own multiple aspects, their own inner voices that wanted to be heard and integrated. She taught people how to access the wisdom of their eternal souls, how to work consciously with past life personas, how to heal ancient wounds that were still affecting their current lives. And through it all, Aspasia remained a constant presence, an inner partner in the work of awakening consciousness. Sometimes, when Samantha was teaching or writing something particularly profound, she could feel Aspasia's energy surging forward, lending power and authority to the words, and she would silently thank her, this ancient philosopher who had refused to be silenced, who had carried her vow across centuries, who had finally found a way to speak again through their shared voice. Samantha understood now that the voice that had frightened her so much wasn't foreign at all. It was her own voice, reaching back across time, carrying wisdom forward, ensuring that what had been learned in one lifetime wouldn't be lost in the next. It was the voice of her eternal soul, speaking through different personas across different incarnations, but always serving the same purpose, always seeking truth, always sharing whatever wisdom had been gathered along the endless journey of existence. Subscribe to hear more voices that carry wisdom across lifetimes.